A little girl was seen begging for food in a wealthy neighborhood, until an elderly woman realized she was the lost heiress of an ancient millionaire family. The scent of freshly baked bread hung in the air, mingling with the soft perfume of the flowers that adorned the elegant balconies of the mansions on Goldleaf Avenue. This street, in the heart of the most exclusive neighborhood in Evergreen Hills, Connecticut, was the epitome of American luxury and opulence. However, on that fall morning, something unusual disturbed the meticulously orchestrated routine of the residents. A small figure, out of place and lonely, walked along the immaculate sidewalk. Her hesitant steps contrasted dramatically with the confident gait of the local residents, who watched her with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. The girl, who looked no older than 8, wore shabby clothes and carried a look that mixed fear and determination. Olivia Hawthorne, an elegant 68-year-old lady, was sitting on her balcony, enjoying her morning tea, when her eyes fell on the little intruder. Something about the child intrigued her deeply. It wasn't just the little girl's shabby appearance that caught her eye, but something in her eyes, a familiar gleam that Olivia couldn't decipher. The girl approached the gate of the Hawthorne mansion, her small, dirty hands gripping the wrought iron bars. Her eyes, an unusual deep blue, met Olivia's. "Excuse me, ma'am," the child's voice was surprisingly clear and polite. "Would you have anything to eat?" Olivia felt her heart squeeze. In all her years living on Goldleaf Avenue, she had never witnessed a scene like this. She stood up, straightening her silk robe, and walked towards the gate. "What's your name, dear?" Olivia asked, her voice soft and welcoming. The girl hesitated for a moment, as if trying to remember. "Lily," she finally replied. "My name is Lily." Olivia opened the gate, inviting Lily in. The girl took a hesitant step into the estate, her eyes wide at the grandeur of Hawthorne Manor. "Come on, Lily," Olivia said gently. "Let's get you something to eat." As they walked towards the house, Olivia couldn't help but notice the details that seemed out of place in that street child. The way Lily carried herself, even in her shabby clothes, had a certain grace. Her gestures, although timid, carried an innate elegance. In the spacious and immaculate kitchen, Olivia prepared a plate of eggs, toast, and fresh fruit for Lily. The little girl ate with a mixture of hunger and decorum that intrigued Mrs. Hawthorne even more. "Lily, dear, where are your parents?" Olivia asked softly, after the girl had finished eating. Lily's eyes filled with tears. I don't know," she replied, her voice trembling. "I don't remember them. I just remember being alone." Olivia felt a wave of compassion and concern. There was something about this girl, something that went beyond a simple street child. She picked up the phone and called her old friend, Detective Richard Callahan. While they waited for Richard to arrive, Olivia took Lily into the guest bathroom, offering her the chance to wash and change. She found some old clothes belonging to her granddaughter, who was now at college, and offered them to Lily. When Lily came out of the bathroom, clean and dressed in suitable clothes, the transformation was remarkable. Her hair, once matted, was a brilliant shade of gold. Her face, free from the grime of the streets, showed delicate, aristocratic features. Detective Callahan arrived shortly afterwards. He listened attentively as Olivia explained the situation and watched Lily with experienced eyes. "There's something familiar about her, Richard," Olivia said quietly. "I can't explain it, but I have the feeling I've seen her before." Richard nodded, his expression serious. "I'll look into it, Olivia. In the meantime, I think it's best if the girl stays here with you. I don't think it's safe to take her to a shelter without knowing more about her situation." While the adults talked, Lily wandered around the Hawthornes' living room. Her eyes landed on an old portrait hanging above the fireplace. It showed an elegant family, a couple with their young son and a baby in his mother's arms. Lily remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the picture. Olivia noticed the girl's interest and approached. "This is an old portrait of the Ashworth family," she explained. "They were our neighbors many years ago. Unfortunately, they disappeared in a tragic boating accident. Only the eldest son survived." Lily touched the glass of the portrait, her fingers tracing the outline of the baby's face in the photo. "She looks like me," she whispered, almost to herself. Olivia and Richard exchanged surprised glances. The resemblance between Lily and the baby in the photo was indeed striking. "Olivia," Richard said slowly, "do you remember what happened to the Ashworth's youngest daughter?" Olivia frowned, trying to remember. "Her body was never found," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone assumed she'd drowned, but—" The silence that followed was full of possibilities. Lily looked at the two adults, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. Richard knelt down beside Lily, his gentle eyes meeting hers. "Lily, you said you don't remember your parents. How long have you been alone?" Lily bit her lip thoughtfully. I'm not sure. It seems a long time ago. Sometimes I have dreams about a big house, like this one, and the sea." Olivia felt her heart racing. The Ashworth mansion was by the sea, not far from here. "Richard," Olivia said, her voice shaking with emotion, "do you think it's possible? After all these years?" The detective stood up, his expression a mixture of caution and hope. "Let's not jump to conclusions, Olivia. But I'm going to start an investigation immediately. If Lily is who we suspect, that will change a lot of things." While the adults discussed the next steps, Lily stood in front of the portrait, her eyes fixed on the image of the baby in her mother's arms. For a brief moment, a flash of recognition crossed her face, as if a long-buried memory was struggling to surface. The day that had begun like any other on Goldleaf Avenue had turned into the beginning of a mystery that promised to shake the foundations of Evergreen Hills high society. The little girl who had appeared begging for food could be the key to unraveling an enigma that had lasted for years, and Olivia Hawthorne was at the center of this intriguing story. As the sun set over the stately mansions, casting long shadows over the manicured gardens, Olivia made a silent promise. She would find out the truth about Lily, no matter what the cost. The mystery of the girl from the streets of gold was only just beginning to unfold, and the revelations that would follow promised to change the fate of everyone involved forever. The next morning brought with it an atmosphere of anticipation at Hawthorne Manor. Olivia woke up early, her thoughts still revolving around the events of the previous day. She found Lily already awake, sitting quietly on the balcony, watching the sunrise over the elegant rooftops of Goldleaf Avenue. "Good morning, darling," Olivia said softly, sitting down next to the girl. "Did you sleep well?" Lily nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yes, Mrs. Hawthorne. I've never slept in such a soft bed before." Olivia's heart squeezed when she heard those words. She wondered about the hardships this child must have faced, living on the streets. "Lily," Olivia began, choosing her words carefully, "do you remember anything about your life before you were on your own?" The girl frowned, her blue eyes clouded with concentration. "Sometimes I have dreams," she said slowly. "I dream of a big house by the sea, and about a woman with golden hair who sings to me." Olivia felt a shiver run down her spine. The description perfectly matched the Ashworth mansion and Amelia Ashworth, her presumed dead mother. Before they could continue their conversation, the sound of a doorbell echoed through the house. It was Richard Callahan, arriving earlier than expected. "Good morning, Olivia," he greeted, his face serious, but with a glint of excitement in his eyes. "I've been researching all night and I have some news." They headed for Olivia's office, leaving Lily in the care of Martha, the Hawthorns' trusted housekeeper. "What have you found out, Richard?" Olivia asked, barely containing her anxiety. Richard opened a folder he was carrying. "First, I got access to the Ashworth case files. The boating accident took place exactly 12 years ago. Charlotte Ashworth, the youngest daughter, would today be the same age we estimate for Lily." Olivia nodded, absorbing the information. "What about her disappearance? Any new leads?" "This is where things get interesting," Richard continued. "I've reviewed the search and rescue reports from the time. Although Charlotte's body was never found, there were reports of fishermen who saw a child being carried by the current towards the shore. At the time, these reports were dismissed as unlikely." "My God," Olivia whispered. "Do you think she might have survived?" Richard hesitated for a moment. It's a remote possibility, but not impossible. If she was found by someone on the coast, someone who didn't know her identity. She could have ended up in the foster system or on the streets, Olivia added, her mind racing with the possibilities. Exactly, Richard agreed. But there's more. Look at this. He pulled an old photograph out of his briefcase. It was a picture of Charlotte Ashworth, taken shortly before the accident. Olivia gasped. The resemblance to Lily was undeniable. The same deep blue eyes, the same delicate shape of the face. That's extraordinary, she muttered. I agree, said Richard. But we need to be careful. We can't raise false hopes. We need concrete proof. At that moment, they were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Martha, looking agitated. Mrs. Hawthorne, she said, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you should see this. They followed Martha into the living room, where they found Lily sitting at the antique piano that had belonged to Olivia's grandmother. To everyone's amazement, the girl was playing a soft, complex melody, her fingers dancing over the keys with a skill that seemed impossible for someone of her age and circumstances. Olivia put her hand to her mouth, instantly recognizing the tune. That's Amelia Ashworth's lullaby, she whispered to Richard. She used to sing it to her children every night. Richard watched the scene, his face a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. How could she know how to play that? Lily stopped playing, finally noticing the presence of the adults. She seemed confused by her own actions. I don't know how I did it, she said, her voice trembling slightly. The music was in my head, and my hands seemed to know what to do. Olivia approached the girl, taking a seat next to her on the piano bench. Lily, darling, where did you learn that song? The girl frowned, her eyes filling with tears of frustration. I don't know. I hear it in my dreams sometimes. A beautiful woman is singing it to me, but I can't see her face clearly. Richard and Olivia exchanged meaningful glances. This was one more piece of the puzzle, one more piece of evidence pointing to the possibility that Lily could, in fact, be Charlotte Ashworth. Lily, Richard said gently, kneeling down to be at the girl's eye level. We'd like to do some tests to help find out more about you. Would you be okay with that? Lily looked at Olivia for reassurance. When the lady nodded encouragingly, the girl agreed. Yes, if it helps me find out who I am and where I came from. While Richard made arrangements for DNA tests and a psychological evaluation, Olivia couldn't help thinking about the implications of it all. If Lily really was Charlotte Ashworth, this would not only solve a years-long mystery, it would also drastically change the girl's future. Charlotte was the heir to a considerable fortune and an important family legacy. But there were also more complex questions to consider. Where had Lily been all these years? How did she end up on the streets? And most importantly, how would she cope with the truth about her identity, if confirmed? Watching the girl shyly return to the piano, softly strumming the keys, Olivia felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. The mystery was far from solved, and she knew that the road ahead would be full of emotional and legal challenges. That night, as she tucked Lily into bed, Olivia couldn't help but notice how the girl seemed more at ease in Hawthorne Manor. It was as if, somehow, she was finally home. Good night, darling, Olivia said softly, kissing Lily's forehead. Good night, Mrs. Hawthorne, Lily replied, her eyes already closing with sleep. Thank you for looking after me. As she closed the bedroom door, Olivia made a silent promise. No matter what the tests revealed, she would protect this child and do everything in her power to ensure her well-being. The mystery of Lily, or Charlotte, was only just beginning to unfold, and Olivia knew that the next few days would bring revelations that could change the fabric of Evergreen Hills society forever. The sun had barely risen when the doorbell of the Hawthorne mansion sounded, breaking the stillness of the morning. Olivia, already awake and anxious, hurried to answer it. On the porch, she found Richard Callahan, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. Good morning, Olivia, he greeted, his voice low. We have some news. May I come in? Olivia led him into the study, casting a quick glance at the stairs, making sure Lily was still asleep. As soon as she had closed the door, she turned to Richard, the anxiety evident in her voice. "What have you found out?" Richard placed a folder on the table. "The preliminary DNA results are in," he began, opening the folder. "It's a match. Olivia? Lily is, without a shadow of a doubt, Charlotte Ashworth." Olivia felt her legs go weak and leaned on the desk. Although she had suspected it, the confirmation still took her by surprise. "My God," she whispered. "So it's true. She's survived all these years." "Yes," Richard agreed. "But that's only the beginning. Now we have more questions than answers. Where has she been? How did she survive? And why did she end up on the streets?" Before they could discuss further, they heard a noise coming from the hallway. The office door opened slowly, revealing Lily, or rather Charlotte, standing there, still dressed in her pajamas, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice trembling. I'm Charlotte Ashworth." Olivia and Richard exchanged looks of surprise and concern. This was not how they had planned to tell the girl the news. "Oh, darling," Olivia said softly, approaching Charlotte and enveloping her in a hug. "Yes, it's true. We've only just found out. I'm sorry you had to hear it that way." Charlotte pulled away slightly, her blue eyes full of unshed tears. I remember some things now. Fragments. The boat. The cold water. And then darkness." Richard knelt beside her, his voice gentle but professional. "Charlotte, I know this is a lot to process, but we need to understand what happened to you after the accident. Do you remember anyone looking after you?" The girl frowned, concentrating. There was a man. He found me on the beach. He said he would look after me." Her expression changed, a flash of fear crossing her face. "But he was no good. He made me beg for him." Olivia felt a surge of anger and protectiveness. "Oh, my darling," she murmured, hugging Charlotte again. Richard made some quick notes. "Can you describe this man, Charlotte?" The girl closed her eyes, as if visualizing. He was tall. He had a scar on his face, near his left eye, and he always wore a big ring with a red stone. The detective nodded, his expression serious. "I'll start a search immediately. This man will have to answer for his crimes." While Richard made some calls, Olivia took Charlotte into the kitchen, determined to provide some comfort through a hearty breakfast. As she prepared pancakes, the girl's favorite these days, Olivia couldn't help but notice how different Charlotte looked now. There was a new intensity in her eyes, as if the newly awakened memories had brought out a long-buried part of her personality. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Charlotte said softly, playing with her fork. "What happens now? Where am I going to live?" Olivia felt her heart squeeze. She knew this question would come, but she wasn't ready to answer it yet. "Well, darling, technically, you're the heir to the Ashworth fortune. Your family mansion still exists, although it's been empty all these years." Charlotte's eyes widened. "A mansion? I have a house?" "Yes, you do," Olivia confirmed, taking a seat next to the girl. "But there's a lot to be sorted out legally before you can claim it, and, of course, you're too young to live on your own." At that moment, Richard returned to the kitchen, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he announced. "The news has leaked out. There are reporters gathering at the gate." Olivia stood up abruptly, going to the window. She could see a small crowd forming, cameras and microphones in hand. "How did this happen?" she asked, turning to Richard. The detective sighed. "Someone in the lab must have spoken. The story of the lost and found Ashworth heiress is too big to be kept secret." Charlotte looked from one adult to the other, fear evident in her eyes. "What's going to happen to me?" Olivia returned to the girl's side, putting a protective arm around her. "Nothing you don't want, sweetheart. We'll protect you." Richard nodded in agreement. "I'll contact the Ashworth family lawyers. They'll need to be informed and will begin the necessary legal procedures. In the meantime, I suggest that Charlotte stays here. Olivia, it's the safest place for her at the moment." As they discussed the next steps, the phone rang. Olivia answered, her expression changing from concern to shock. "I see," she said after a moment. "Yes, thank you for letting me know." Hanging up the phone, she turned to Richard and Charlotte. "That was Ashworth Bank. Apparently, someone is trying to access the family's accounts using old documents. They suspect fraud." Richard frowned. "That can't be a coincidence. Someone else must have found out about Charlotte and is trying to take advantage of the situation." Charlotte, who had been listening to everything in silence, suddenly spoke, her voice surprisingly firm. "It's him, the man who found me. He always talked about money, about how I was his golden goose. I think he knew who I was all along." The silence that followed was heavy. The situation had become far more complex and potentially dangerous than either of them had imagined. Olivia was the first to break the silence. "Well, one thing's for sure. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you again, Charlotte. We'll face this together." Richard nodded, his expression determined. "I'll double my efforts to find this man. In the meantime, I'll provide security for the mansion. You two need to stay safe." While the adults discussed the details of how to protect Charlotte and investigate the mysterious man who had exploited her, the girl remained seated at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the world she barely knew was about to be turned upside down by her rediscovery. Charlotte knew that her life would never be the same again. The memories that were beginning to surface brought with them not only answers, but also new fears and uncertainties. However, looking at Olivia and Richard, she felt something she hadn't experienced for a long time. Hope. The mystery of her identity had been solved, but a new chapter, full of unknown challenges and dangers, was just beginning. Charlotte Ashworth, the lost and found heiress, was about to face a world she wasn't prepared for, with enemies she didn't yet know, and a fortune that could be both a blessing and a curse. Hawthorne Manor, normally a haven of tranquility on Goldleaf Avenue, had turned into a besieged fortress. In the days following the revelation of Charlotte's identity, a crowd of reporters, onlookers, and opportunists flocked to the gates, all eager for a glimpse of the rediscovered Ashworth heiress. Inside the house, Charlotte watched the chaos outside with a mixture of fascination and fear. "Why are they so interested in me?" she asked Olivia, who was standing next to her, both of them hidden behind the living room curtains. Olivia sighed, putting a comforting arm around the girl's shoulders. "Your story is extraordinary, darling, and unfortunately, the fact that you're the heir to a great fortune makes it all the more interesting for them." Before Charlotte could reply, the doorbell rang. Richard, who had practically moved into Hawthorne Manor to help protect Charlotte, went to answer it. Moments later, he entered the room accompanied by a middle-aged woman, elegantly dressed in a gray suit. "Charlotte, Olivia," Richard said. "This is Veronica Blackwell, the Ashworth family lawyer." Veronica approached, her shrewd eyes scrutinizing Charlotte with intensity. "It really is extraordinary," she murmured, before pulling herself together. "Miss Ashworth, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've been managing your family's legal affairs since the accident." Charlotte nodded shyly, unconsciously moving closer to Olivia. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Blackwell." Veronica turned to Olivia and Richard. "We need to discuss the next steps. The situation is complicated." The adults retired to their office, leaving Charlotte alone with her thoughts. The girl wandered around the room, her fingers tracing the contours of the elegant furniture. All of this, the mansion, the reporters, the lawyers, seemed so far removed from her life on the streets. Part of her longed for the simplicity of before, even with all the difficulties. In the office, the discussion was heated. Veronica had brought in a pile of documents, which were now spread out on the table. "Here's the situation," she explained, pointing to several papers. "With the confirmation of Charlotte's identity, she is legally the heir to the entire Ashworth fortune. This includes not only money and property, but also shares in various companies." "What's the total value?" Richard asked, his detective mind already anticipating possible complications. Veronica hesitated for a moment. "It's hard to give an exact figure, but we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars." Olivia gasped, while Richard whistled softly. "That explains the media frenzy," he commented. And it also explains why someone is trying to illegally access the accounts, Olivia added, her voice laden with concern. Veronica nodded gravely. Exactly, and there's more. As Charlotte is a minor, we need to set up a legal guardianship. Normally, that would go to the next of kin, but all the Ashworths are dead, Olivia added softly. Precisely, Veronica confirmed. That means we'll have to go through a court process to determine who will be Charlotte's legal guardian and, by extension, who will manage her fortune until she comes of age. Richard frowned. Doesn't that leave room for malicious people to try to take advantage of the situation? Unfortunately, yes, Veronica admitted. In fact, I've already had several calls from people claiming to be distant relatives of the Ashworths, all, coincidentally, very interested in Charlotte's welfare. Olivia felt a wave of protection rise up inside her. What about me? Could I be Charlotte's guardian? Veronica looked at her sympathetically. It's a possibility, Mrs. Hawthorne. Your connection to the Ashworth family and the fact that Charlotte is already in your care play in your favor. But I must warn you, it will be a difficult and potentially long process. As the adults continued their discussion, Charlotte got tired of waiting. Quietly, she left the house through the back door, finding refuge in the Hawthorns' extensive garden. There, away from the prying eyes and worried voices, she finally allowed the tears to fall. This is how Olivia found her, minutes later, sitting under an old oak tree, hugging her knees to her chest. Without saying a word, the lady sat down next to the girl, offering silent comfort. I don't want any of this, Charlotte finally said, her voice breaking. I just wanted to belong somewhere. Olivia hugged her, feeling her heart break a little. Oh, darling, she murmured. You belong here with me, no matter what happens to all this money or these properties. Charlotte looked at her, her blue eyes shining with unshed tears. Promise. I promise, Olivia replied firmly. We'll face it together. At that moment, Richard appeared in the garden, his face a mask of worry. Olivia, Charlotte, he called. You need to see this. They followed him back inside, where the TV was on a news channel. On the screen, a middle-aged man with a prominent scar near his left eye was being interviewed. Yes, I've looked after Charlotte for all these years, he said, his oily voice laden with false sincerity. I found her after the accident, a poor orphan with no memory. I did my best to raise her, but she ran away a few months ago. I'm so relieved that she's been found safe. Charlotte froze, her face paling. It's him, she whispered, the fear evident in her voice. The man who forced me to beg. Olivia hugged her protectively, while Richard was already on the phone, his voice urgent as he spoke to his contacts at the police. The situation had become even more complicated. The man from Charlotte's past had not only resurfaced, but was now trying to present himself as her benefactor. The battle for Charlotte's guardianship, and for control of her vast inheritance, was about to become much more heated and dangerous. As night fell over Goldleaf Avenue, the occupants of Hawthorne Manor prepared for what promised to be a long and difficult journey. Charlotte, the reluctant heiress, faced not only the weight of her newfound fortune, but also the shadows of a past that refused to stay buried. The mystery of her identity had been solved, but new enigmas and dangers were emerging all the time. The battle for the truth, for justice, and for Charlotte's future was just beginning, and no one could predict how it would end. The Evergreen Hills Courthouse has rarely seen so much excitement. On the morning of the hearing that would decide Charlotte Ashworth's future, a crowd gathered on the steps of the imposing stone building. Journalists, onlookers, and even a few opportunists waited anxiously for a glimpse of the young heiress. Inside a limousine with darkened windows, Charlotte watched the scene with a mixture of fear and fascination. Olivia held her hand tightly, offering silent comfort. Remember, darling, Olivia said softly, you're not alone in this. We'll be by your side the whole time. Charlotte nodded, swallowing. She was wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress, her golden hair carefully combed. She looked older than her 12 years, the weight of the last few days evident in her eyes. Richard, sitting in the front seat, turned to them. Are you ready? Once we get out of the car, it'll be a frenzy." With a determined nod from Olivia, the driver opened the doors. Immediately, they were inundated with camera flashes and shouts from reporters. Richard and 2 security guards formed a human shield around Charlotte and Olivia, guiding them quickly up the steps of the courthouse. In the lobby, they met Veronica Blackwell, who was waiting for them with a tense expression. "We have a problem," she said quietly. "The man who claims to have looked after Charlotte, Maxwell Thorne, has filed for guardianship." Olivia gasped, while Charlotte visibly paled. "He can't do that," Olivia exclaimed. "After everything he's done?" Veronica shook her head. "Unfortunately, without concrete proof of mistreatment, the court has to consider all petitions. But don't worry, we're prepared to contest it." They entered the courtroom, which was already full. On the opposite side, Charlotte saw Maxwell Thorne for the first time in months. He smiled at her, a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. The scar near his left eye seemed more prominent under the court lights. Judge Malcolm Stern, a middle-aged man with gray hair and piercing eyes, entered the room. "Order in the court," he announced, his voice resonating through the room. "We are here to determine the legal guardianship of Charlotte Ashworth, recently identified as the lost heir of the Ashworth family." The next few hours were a whirlwind of testimony and legal arguments. Veronica presented Olivia's case, highlighting the care and stability she had provided Charlotte in her final days. Richard testified about the circumstances in which Charlotte was found and his suspicions about Maxwell Thorne's involvement. When it was Charlotte's turn to testify, the room fell silent. She climbed onto the witness stand, looking small and vulnerable. "Miss Ashworth," Judge Stern said gently, "can you tell us about your life before you were found by Mrs. Hawthorne?" Charlotte took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Olivia's in the crowd. I didn't remember much at first, but now some memories have come back. I remember the accident, the cold water, and then Mr. Thorne found me." "And what was your life like with Mr. Thorne?" Olivia's lawyer asked. Charlotte hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. He made me beg in the street. He said I was his golden goose. When I didn't bring in enough money, His voice faltered. A murmur went through the room. Maxwell Thorne shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. Judge Stern frowned. "Miss Ashworth, these are very serious charges. Are you sure what you're saying?" Charlotte nodded, wiping away a tear. "Yes, sir, I'm sure." Thorne's lawyer stood up for cross-examination. "Miss Ashworth, if Mr. Thorne was so terrible, why didn't you run away before?" "I tried," Charlotte replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But he always found me. He said I was special, that one day we'd be rich because of me. I didn't understand what he meant at the time." The questioning continued, with Thorne's lawyer trying to undermine Charlotte's credibility, suggesting that her memories could be confused or influenced by Olivia. But the girl stood her ground, her voice gaining strength as she told her story. When Charlotte finally left the witness box, there was a moment of silence in the room. Judge Stern looked deeply disturbed. "This court will take a brief recess," he announced. "We will return in 1 hour to hear closing arguments." In the corridor outside the courtroom, Olivia hugged Charlotte tightly. "You were so brave, darling," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Richard approached, his face serious. "I've received some important information," he said quietly. "The police have found evidence corroborating Charlotte's story in an apartment rented by Thorne. Fake documents, cash, even photos of Charlotte begging." Veronica nodded, her eyes shining. "This could be what we need to turn the tables. I'll inform the judge immediately." When the hearing resumed, there was a palpable tension in the air. Judge Stern listened to the final arguments from both sides, his face a mask of concentration. Finally, he rose to announce his decision. "This is an extraordinary case," he began, "with implications that go far beyond this courtroom. Based on the evidence presented and the courageous testimony of Miss Ashworth, this court grants temporary custody of Charlotte Ashworth to Olivia Hawthorne." A collective sigh of relief ran through Charlotte's side of the room. Olivia hugged the little girl, tears of joy in her eyes. The judge continued. Furthermore, I order a full investigation into the allegations against Mr. Maxwell Thorne. Mr. Thorne, you are forbidden to have any contact with Charlotte Ashworth until further notice. Maxwell Thorne stood up abruptly, his face contorted with rage. This is an outrage, he shouted. She belongs to me. I created her. Guards moved quickly to restrain Thorne, who continued to shout threats as he was removed from the room. As chaos ensued, Charlotte clung to Olivia, trembling slightly. Is it over? She asked quietly. Olivia hugged her tightly. Not completely, darling, but it's a start. We're on the right track. As they left the courthouse, once again facing the crowd of reporters and onlookers, Charlotte felt different. The weight on her shoulders hadn't completely disappeared, but it felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope for the future. The legal battle might be over, but Charlotte knew that her journey was far from over. There was still so much to learn about her past, her family, and the legacy she now carried. But with Olivia by her side and the truth finally coming out, she felt ready to face whatever the future held. As the limousine pulled away from the courthouse, taking them back to the Hawthorne mansion, Charlotte looked out of the window at the town she now knew to be her home. Evergreen Hills held many secrets, and she was determined to uncover them, one by one. The weeks following the court hearing brought a relative calm to Charlotte Ashworth's life. Hawthorne Manor, once a temporary refuge, was now officially her home. Olivia, with her temporary guardianship confirmed, had devoted herself entirely to providing Charlotte with the stability and love she so desperately needed. On a sunny Saturday morning, Charlotte was sitting on the balcony, a book open on her lap, but her eyes wandered over the well-kept garden. Olivia watched her from the doorway, a soft smile on her lips. "A penny for your thoughts," Olivia said, coming over and sitting down next to Charlotte. The girl smiled, a gesture that was becoming more and more frequent. "I was thinking about how quickly everything has changed. Sometimes it seems like yesterday I was on the streets, and other times it seems like another lifetime." Olivia nodded understandingly. "It's a lot to process, isn't it?" "Yes," Charlotte agreed. "But you know what? For the first time in a long time, I feel safe." The words warmed Olivia's heart. She was about to reply when the sound of an approaching car caught her attention. It was Richard, arriving for his weekly visit. The detective got in, carrying a thick briefcase under his arm. His face was serious, but there was a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted. "I have some news." They gathered in the living room, where Richard spread out several documents on the coffee table. "The investigation into Maxwell Thorne is progressing," he began. "We've discovered that he has a history of fraud and child exploitation. Charlotte wasn't his first victim." Charlotte shuddered slightly, and Olivia put a protective arm around her. Richard continued, "But there's more. While we were investigating Thorne, we found something intriguing about the accident that killed your parents." "Charlotte." The girl leaned forward, her eyes wide. "What did you find out?" Richard picked up an old report. The accident was officially classified as a freak accident, caused by a sudden storm, but some details don't add up. There are indications that the boat may have been sabotaged. Olivia gasped. Sabotaged? But why? Who would do that? "We're not sure yet," Richard admitted, "but we did find some suspicious financial transactions in the weeks leading up to the accident. Large sums of money being moved around in unusual ways." Charlotte, who had been listening in silence, suddenly spoke up. "I remember something. It's vague, but the night before the accident, I heard my parents arguing. My father sounded worried, talking about doing the right thing and exposing the truth." Richard made quick notes. "This could be significant." "Charlotte, do you remember any more details of that conversation?" The girl frowned, concentrating. "Not much, but I do remember that my mother mentioned a name, Holloway, I think." The detective exchanged a meaningful glance with Olivia. "Holloway? That name appears on some of the financial documents we found. It could be our first real lead." Olivia stood up, walking over to the window. This is all so disturbing. If the accident wasn't an accident, that means someone deliberately tried to... She didn't complete her sentence, casting a worried glance at Charlotte. Richard nodded gravely. It's a possibility we can't ignore. And if someone really was after the Ashworth family, it might explain why Thorne was so interested in Charlotte. He may just have been a pawn in a much bigger game. Charlotte, who had been absorbing everything in silence, suddenly stood up. "I want to go to Ashworth Manor," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "If there are answers about what happened to my parents, they might be there." Olivia and Richard exchanged looks of surprise. The Ashworth mansion had remained closed since the accident, a ghost property that few in the town dared to mention. "Charlotte, darling, are you sure?" Olivia asked softly. "It can be very emotionally difficult for you." The girl nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "I'm sure it's time to face my past. Maybe then I can really move on." Richard scratched his chin thoughtfully. "It might be a good idea. The mansion has been preserved as it was on the day of the accident. There may be clues there that we missed in the original investigation." Olivia still looked hesitant, but seeing the determination on Charlotte's face, she relented. "All right, but we'll go together, and at the first sign that it's getting too much for you, we'll come back immediately." The next day, a cool, cloudy Sunday, the trio headed to the old Ashworth mansion. Situated on a cliff overlooking the ocean, the property was an imposing sight, even after years of neglect. When the car stopped at the circular driveway, Charlotte felt her heart racing. Fragmented memories began to emerge, laughter echoing through the corridors, the smell of freshly baked cookies, the feeling of safety in her mother's arms. They entered the house, the creak of the door echoing through the empty foyer. A thin layer of dust covered everything, giving the mansion an ethereal appearance, as if time had stood still. Charlotte walked slowly through the foyer, her fingers lightly brushing the covered furniture. She stopped in front of a large family portrait, her eyes fixed on the smiling faces of her parents. "I remember this day," she said softly. "It was my 5th birthday. Dad gave me a necklace." Suddenly, she brought her hand up to her neck, her eyes widening. "The necklace! How could I forget? Dad gave me a necklace that day and said it was very important, that I should always keep it with me." Richard approached, puzzled. "Do you still have that necklace, Charlotte?" The girl shook her head in frustration. "No, I think I lost it when I was with Thorne, or maybe he took it from me. I don't remember." Olivia frowned. "That necklace could be important." "Richard, do you think it could be another clue?" The detective nodded. "Definitely. I'll add it to our list of things to investigate." They continued exploring the house, each room bringing up new memories for Charlotte. In her father's study, she stopped in front of a painting on the wall. "There's something strange here," she murmured, tilting her head. Carefully, she moved the painting, revealing a small safe built into the wall. Richard approached quickly. "Good eye, Charlotte. That safe wasn't mentioned in the original reports." After a few minutes of trying various combinations, Charlotte suggested the date of her birth. To everyone's surprise, the safe opened with a soft click. Inside, they found a folder full of documents, a USB stick, and a sealed letter addressed to Charlotte to be opened on her 18th birthday. Richard examined the documents quickly, his face becoming increasingly serious. That's big. It seems your father was investigating a major corporate fraud. Big names are involved, including Holloway." Olivia, who had been watching Charlotte closely, noticed that the girl looked pale. "Darling, are you all right? Do you want us to stop?" Charlotte shook her head. "No, I need to know. I need to understand why this happened to my family." As Richard continued to examine the documents, Olivia hugged Charlotte. "You're being very brave. Your parents would be proud." The girl smiled weakly, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you for being here with me, Olivia. I couldn't have done it alone." As the day progressed, more of the Ashworth family's secrets came to light. The USB stick contained even more evidence of the fraud Charlotte's father was investigating. It was clear that he was about to expose a massive scam involving some of the most powerful families in Evergreen Hills. When they finally left the Ashworth mansion, the sky was darkening, reflecting the group's somber mood. The day's discoveries had shed new light on Charlotte's past, but they had also opened a Pandora's box of new dangers and complications. On the drive back to Hawthorne Manor, Charlotte remained silent, staring out of the car window. Her mind was filled with new information and resurfaced memories. She knew that her journey was far from over. In fact, it felt like it had only just begun. Olivia watched the girl with a mixture of pride and concern. She knew the days ahead would be challenging, but she was determined to protect Charlotte and help her discover the truth about her past, no matter the cost. As the car turned into the driveway of Hawthorne Manor, Charlotte made a silent promise to herself and to the parents she had lost. She would find out the truth, no matter how long it took, and one day, she would do justice to their memory. The mystery of the Ashworth family was just beginning to unfold, and Charlotte knew she was at the center of it all. With Olivia and Richard by her side, she felt ready to face whatever the future held. Summer had arrived in Evergreen Hills, bringing with it not only warmth, but also a sense of change in the air. 6 months had passed since the revelations at Ashworth Manor, and Charlotte's life had been transformed in ways she could never have imagined. On the balcony of Hawthorne Manor, now her permanent home, Charlotte watched the sunrise, a cup of hot tea in her hands. At 13, she looked older, her eyes carrying a wisdom beyond her years. Olivia joined her, taking a seat in the chair next to her. "Great day today," she said softly. Charlotte nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Hard to believe it's finally here." The day they had both been waiting for was the conclusion of the trial of Maxwell Thorne and several others involved in the conspiracy that had claimed the lives of Charlotte's parents. The evidence found in the secret safe had triggered a massive investigation, exposing a network of corruption that stretched to the highest echelons of Evergreen Hills society. As they prepared to go to court, Charlotte reflected on the tumultuous events of the last few months. The search for the mysterious necklace her father had given her had led to more surprising revelations. Richard had found it in a pawn shop in a neighboring town, sold by Thorne years before. The necklace, which looked like ordinary jewelry at first glance, contained a secret compartment. Inside was a microchip with even more incriminating evidence. It was clear that Charlotte's father had foreseen the danger and taken precautions to protect his investigation. In court, the atmosphere was tense. Charlotte, Olivia, and Richard sat together, watching as the jury entered to announce the verdict. Maxwell Thorne, now a shadow of the arrogant man he had once been, sat slumped in the dock. Beside him, several of Evergreen Hills' most prominent citizens awaited their fate. Judge Stern, the same judge who had presided over Charlotte's custody hearing, called for order in the room. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The president of the jury stood up, his firm voice echoing through the room. "Yes, Your Honor. We find all the defendants guilty of all charges." A murmur ran through the room, which soon turned into a hubbub of excited voices. Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling a wave of emotions: relief, sadness, and a bittersweet sense of completion. Olivia squeezed her hand gently. "It's all right, darling. It's over." But for Charlotte, it wasn't an end, but a new beginning. As they left the courtroom, once again facing a crowd of reporters, she felt ready to speak. "Miss Ashworth, how do you feel about the verdict?" shouted a reporter. Charlotte took a deep breath, her voice surprisingly firm. "Today, justice has been done, not just for me, but for all those who were harmed by this conspiracy. My parents dedicated their lives to doing what was right, and I intend to honor their legacy." Her words were met with an explosion of camera flashes and more questions. But Richard and Olivia deftly guided her through the crowd to their waiting car. Back at Hawthorne Manor, Charlotte found a surprise waiting for her. Veronica Blackwell, the family lawyer, was there with a warm smile and a thick briefcase under her arm. "Charlotte," she said, "with the conclusion of the trial, we are finally free to proceed with the affairs of the Ashworth estate. There are some decisions you need to make." The next few hours were spent discussing the vast business and philanthropic empire that Charlotte had inherited. It was an overwhelming responsibility for someone so young, but she faced each decision with a maturity that impressed everyone. "I want to continue my parents' charitable work," Charlotte declared, "and to use the family's resources to make a difference, just as they would have done." Olivia felt her eyes fill with tears of pride. "Your parents would have been so proud of you, darling." As night fell, Charlotte found herself once again on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Richard joined her, a file in his hands. "I thought you might like to see this," he said, handing her the file. "It's the final report on the investigation into your parents' accident." Charlotte opened it with trembling hands. There, in black and white, were the final details of what had really happened that fateful night. The sabotage of the boat, orchestrated by those her father was about to expose. The storm that had been just a tragic coincidence, turning a murder plot into an even bigger disaster. "Thank you, Richard," she said softly, "for never giving up, for helping to bring the truth to light." The detective smiled gently. "It's been an honor, Charlotte. Your courage through it all was truly inspiring." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Charlotte sat in her room, the letter from her parents, the one that was only to be opened on her 18th birthday, in her hands. After months of internal debate, she finally felt ready to read it. Carefully, she broke the seal and unfolded the paper, immediately recognizing her mother's handwriting. "Our dear Charlotte, if you are reading this, it means that the moment we have been dreading has arrived. We hope this letter finds you well and safe. Know that no matter what has happened, our love for you is eternal and unwavering. The world can seem a scary and unfair place at times, but never forget who you are. You are an Ashworth, and that means more than just a name or a fortune. It means integrity, compassion, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. We don't know what challenges you've faced or what secrets may have come to light, but we trust you to carry on our family's legacy with honor and grace. Always remember, a person's true value lies not in what they own, but in the positive impact they have on the lives of others. We are with you, always, with all our love, Mom and Dad." Tears flowed freely down Charlotte's face as she hugged the letter to her chest. For the first time since the accident, she felt truly connected to her parents, their love crossing time and distance to reach her. The next morning, Charlotte came down to breakfast with a new determination in her eyes. Olivia noticed the change immediately. "Is everything all right, darling?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Charlotte smiled, a genuine, bright smile that lit up the whole kitchen. "Yes, Olivia. In fact, you're better than fine. I know what I want to do now." In the months and years that followed, Charlotte Ashworth became a force to be reckoned with in Evergreen Hills and beyond. She transformed her family's business empire into a model of corporate responsibility and philanthropy. The Ashworth Foundation, created in memory of her parents, has become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country, focused on protecting vulnerable children and promoting social justice. The Ashworth Mansion, once a symbol of tragedy, has been renovated and transformed into a community center, offering educational and support programs for at-risk youth. And through it all, Olivia remained by her side, not just as legal guardian, but as the mother figure Charlotte so desperately needed. Together, they formed an unconventional family, but one full of love and mutual respect. As Charlotte approached her 18th birthday, she reflected on the incredible journey her life had been. From a girl lost on the streets to a young woman determined to make a difference in the world, she had faced challenges that would have broken many others. But Charlotte Ashworth wasn't just a survivor. She was a force of nature, shaped by the experiences of her past, but not defined by them. With Olivia, Richard, and an entire community by her side, she was ready to write the next chapter of her story, a chapter of hope, healing, and a bright future not just for her, but for all those whose lives she would touch. On the eve of her birthday, Charlotte once again stood on the balcony of Hawthorne Manor, gazing up at the stars. She held the necklace her father had given her, now a symbol not only of her past, but of her future. "Thank you," she whispered to the night sky, her words laden with gratitude for her parents, for Olivia, for all the people who had helped her on her journey. And as the clock struck midnight, heralding the start of her 18th year, Charlotte Ashworth smiled, ready to embrace her family's legacy and create one of her own. The girl from the streets of gold had found her way home, and her story was far from over.
Did this narrative stir your emotions? Don't forget to express your approval with a like. Take advantage of the Super Thanks feature, available just below the video, to offer direct support to the channel and contribute to the production of more fascinating content. Subscribe and remember to activate the bell to stay up to date with all the latest updates. And attention, a new exciting story is already ready to be displayed on your screen. Your participation means a lot to me, and I hope to count on your presence soon. Thank you very much for dedicating your time to this video.